Greg IdrA Fields facing off against oGsGon, Game 2 of the series. Make sure to check out Game 1 if you haven't already, link in the description. This map is Xel'Naga Caverns. This is a very open, natural map. A lot of the maps in StarCraft 2, the natural bases were hard to take because of the rush distance between natural to natural. I'm of course talking about the first year and a half of the game's life or so. The reason this natural was considered somewhat difficult to defend was because of how open it was. Now this meant that Zerg players actually could go for aggressive builds on this map, whereas a lot of maps, even though it was very hard for Zerg to expand themselves, it was very easy for Terran and Protoss to expand. So IdrA is not known as a guy who will ever do aggressive play, but he's being eBay blocked again here, and regardless of how aggressive you want to play, you want to go out and attack this SCV. You do not want to let Terran players establish a full eBay block. But this map, because of how open the natural is, sometimes Zerg players would opt for speedling expand. This allowed them to pressure a little bit and force the player to maybe make a few extra defensive structures. Remember, back in this time there was no mothership core, no shield battery, and Terran players had to research siege mode, so maybe you had to force a extra bunker from Terran, or have someone make a extra long, weird wall in, because on this map, if you were Terran or Protoss, you were sort of sitting there saying, well, how am I going to take my natural? Am I going to make all of my stuff down there and just die to any super early cheese? Or am I going to just go for a lot of early units, or maybe do something to keep them on their side of the map? But it was very hard for Terran and Protoss to fast expand safely against Zerg on this map. Now, granted, it was the opposite way around on almost every other map, and Terran players and Protoss players found themselves sort of saying, well, I'll just go for one base aggression, and whether it fails or succeeds, I'll be able to expand behind it. That was sort of the metagame development that Zerg didn't really have access to because of the way that the macro mechanics of Zerg works. Even any sort of aggressive Zerg option really has to be on 2 base. We can see even now in the Legacy of the Void era, any aggressive Zerg option, it's like a hatch is either proxied or it's off of 2 bases and you're just not going to drone the natural. But IdrA's going for 1 base roach here, and because the natural was so open, as a beautiful scan goes down there and it sees the roach warren and the roach is coming out. Now the warren is so early that that's definitely indicative of aggressive play, and because his earlier scout didn't see a natural, that's how he sort of knew to scan. And the roach had just been buffed from 3 to 4 range right before this. Literally the first part of this tournament was not played under that patch, but right before this, the repugnant 3 range roach, which was insidiously slow and couldn't be changed into a ravager, yeah, it went up to 4 range. So a lot of times what people would try to do was like hide an overlord sort of right above this barracks and have the roaches snipe at the low ground, but without any tech lab researching anything, IdrA's going to run up here, try to slam through the depot, realize, well, that bunker is full, a Hellion's already out, I'll just sort of poke and prod, and he's expanding behind it. But roach play was more favorable on this map, even for your Zerg players who really detested roaches, because the Hellion was so insidiously powerful. Remember, folks, the Queen was a complete laughingstock in this era. Had 3 ground range. Creep was worse as far as mechanically and how it worked, the way that it was spread. The Queen's anti-air range was worse, so it's not like now where you could just build a shitload of Queens and be pretty much safe versus a lot of stuff. Also, look how open this natural is. You're not really going to be able to double Evo SimCity your way to a safe early game, and Blue Flame is about 80% of the way done, as IdrA is desperately trying to get a spine down, doesn't want to lose workers. Remember, it's way slower in the early game back in wings, so losing workers early is way more harmful, but IdrA will thankfully lose next to nothing, as roaches are way better at defending Hellions, especially of the Blue Flame variety, than Lings are. Almost all Zerg players favored a Ling-focused opener, usually into Muta, and a couple years later, in 2012, Zerg players would realize double upgrade Lings with Banes and Infestors was the way to go. But back in this era, it was still very testy, and here we go. A little bit of Blue Flame Hellion action comes in. Blue Flame Hellions in this era were just disgustingly powerful. They did plus 10 damage to light units, not plus 5 like they do now. They were real ball breakers. And whenever roaches were slow and had crappy range, and remember, you didn't want to make roaches. It's not like now where you have players like Dark who will open up with a solid dozen roaches, and it's like, well, it's not really a big deal if he made those and the other player doesn't attack, because he can just make a few Ravagers, and the Ravager is a very useful tool. The Roach was seen as sort of a joke unit that didn't scale, especially versus Terran. IdrA's grabbing an Evo, the Terran player is getting Siege Mode and Stim, and IdrA's breaking down his third base rocks that lead down to the normal third. There was also a gold base on this map that was rocked, and another attempt at harassment coming down, but IdrA very diligently has a Spine and 2 Roaches at his ramp. This means that the Terran player is almost certainly going to try to just Rambo his way into the main. He'll run into the Roaches, but notice the Spine's on the right side and not the left. So whenever the Terran player fails to get his way into the main, he's going to just try to fork over right into the natural every single time. No Terran player is going to try to go into the main, see, oh, there's 2 Roaches, and just run. He's already right there. You know, he's going to try to freaking peek the natural. It's like if you drive all the way to a drive-thru and you see on the menu that they've just like idiotically written something that's been taped up there for a week that says like, we're out of Big Macs. Like, if the Big Mac's a thing you always get, you're still going to ask, like, can I get a Big Mac? You're not going to just be like, oh, the sign says they're out of Big Macs. Like, Terran players aren't going to see those 2 Roaches and be like, I guess his natural's buttoned up too. So the Spine Crawler enables the Terran not to just see your good defense on your ramp and just go, okay, fuck that, and get 10 drones anyway. These things are worth noting whenever the maps are smaller, they're harder to defend in general, and you have less aggressive options and the game is less forgiving. You know, it's one thing to sit here and say, oh, well, I'm going to open Roach and that's the safe option versus Hellions. At this time, it was so much more difficult just in general for Zerg that you could do that and still take devastating damage, where you had to play way more clean as Zerg at this time. You couldn't make big unforced errors and sloppy Joe ludicrous mistakes. And remember, the Queen was way worse, so that makes Zerg way worse overall, because part of what makes Zerg so good now, and why we've seen so many Zerg champions over the last 5 years, is the consistency and power of the Queen and how much safety it gives you. And looking at the minimap, notice how diligently IdrA has creeping Overlord spread. Overlords at the joke 4th base, Overlords at the normal 3rd base, Overlords at the backdoor path, and here we see a pre-medevac time he's going to get smoked. Absolutely eviscerated. As it was very common for Terran players to try to attack before 2 things, before mutas, and while the Zerg player wanted to get the 3rd base droned up. And both attacks sort of served the same purpose. Zerg is going into a power trough whenever they want to flood their 3rd with drones, or whenever they want to be saving money for right when the Spire finishes to get a bunch of muta. So the concept is the same. The Terran player wants to move out and do damage right at that time, because Zerg is just wanting to make drones. Zerg isn't like Terran and Protoss where they can make both workers and attacking units efficiently. They want to be doing one or the other. And since IdrA was going Roach and not Muta, he already had a hefty backbone built up. And here we're going to see IdrA do something that Artosis would always harp on, which is if you're ahead, get more ahead. Notice IdrA probably could have Ramboed in there, taken an engagement with shitty Roaches, flipped a coin on there not being Banshees or a drop anywhere out on the map, and tried to break his opponent. But instead he says, look, I vision of the 3rd, and he even sees the gold base with that Overlord just north of the one dropping creep on the third itself. He definitely sees that he still doesn't have it. And he's saying, my Ultraless Cavern's over halfway done. I'm going to go into Ultras here, and once I have my Ultras out, then I really can't lose. This is a bread and butter, typical intelligent Zerg macro mechanic that holds true still even to this day, that if you're playing a defensive Zerg macro style and you hold a big push, you don't fucking counter and risk losing your whole army when you see that he has enough to hold your counter. No, you make a bunch of drones and take another base and get more upgrades and tech up. And eventually, once you've done that 2 or 3 times in a game, see, that's the Overlord I was talking about that could see the gold base third, is once you've done that, you accrue basically an insurmountable macro advantage, and then you can finally steamroll your opponent once you've done that several times. And that's sort of just like the Cliff Notes dummy version of playing defensive macro Zerg. It's all about scouting, playing properly, nailing your injects and mechanics, and then once you hold whatever Terran's doing, making a bunch of drones and going on to the next step of your macro. I was talking to Sort of the other day, and he said that TVZ is all about mechanics. It's the most mechanical matchup in the game. You know, when you face Protoss, it's more about figuring out what they're doing and stopping whatever bullshit thing they're doing. ZVZ honestly is sort of a joke. Like, are they gonna go Muta? I hope not. You know, Zerg has so many defensive tools where I think it sort of fucked up ZVZ. I like the Heart of the Swarm era of ZVZ where both players went Muta, and once one guy got like a 4 Muta edge, it just got to the point where the person with the edge, if they were good, would just keep getting a bigger edge, and then winning. This stopped when the Spore Crawler was buff versus bio, which vexingly didn't help Zerg in any other matchup. It just only made ZVZ shitty. Third base is creep tier. The fucking creep is just god tier off the wall for early Wings of Liberty. And Ultra Roach slams forward. Infested Terran spewed out. Fungal goes down. My god, it's good to see those eggs again. As Microbial Shroud is a repugnant disgrace. Ultra slamming forward. And this is absolutely beautiful stuff here from IdrA. As since he has Ultras out, he'll be able to Rambo through the rest of the tanks. Where if you were to have gone like Roach Hydra, having those tanks like staggered backwards, you get to these weird points in engagements where it's like these tanks, after they get like 5 shots off combined, my army's just going to disappear. The Ultra really helps the Zerg player not die to that. Also notice the utility of the Infestor, as the GG is called in IdrA wins 2-0. The Infestor was not thought of as this god unit that spammed fungal and was all powerful. It was just sort of this necessary thing that Zerg made like 3 of to close the game. And we can see here the Korean player thought very well and planned his series intelligently in the way that he thought would help him win, but IdrA's mechanics were too good. Let's just fuck this OGS jacket at the end here. The Korean player, watch when he stands up. Gone. Remember, he's the coach of OGS. It's absolutely incredible how sharp this jacket is. Reminds me of like a Korean version of those Team Liquid jackets that were all white. It's really sharp. But look at the creep spread on this map here for IdrA. This was in a time where even the god tier macro Zergs were spreading creep like shit. And if they were spreading creep well, it was all in one direction. It wasn't forking out on the sides of the map. And IdrA had creep everywhere. Overlord spreading and looking everywhere. And one thing look at that jacket, my god, that's sharp. It's on the chair, obviously, not on his body. One thing that I noticed about IdrA's play, though, is that whenever I would watch him play stream games, like just ladder, he wouldn't be that diligent about, like, creep dropping the 3rd and 4th with overlords, like doing the little annoying shit that he would do in tournament games. It was weird. It was almost like it was beneath him. But whenever I see him in these GSL games, he looked really sharp there, really pulling out all the stops. I mean, the 3rd match was on Lost Temple, which, if you watch this channel even a little bit, I don't even need to talk about what that map is like. Just a fiasco for Zerg. Cliff overlooking the natural, so this has been another edition of Gregathon. Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell notification. like the video and check out the playlist. Easy.